Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome to day 11 of the Devoted Reading Plan. So excited to be back with my friends Collin, Shameeka, and Victoria. Man, we're going to jump right into our conversation today. We have 4 chapters to cover, chapters 28, 29, 30, and 31 in Genesis. And so we left off with Esau being very upset at Jacob for stealing his birthright, but then his blessing. And now Jacob is on the run. It's kind of where we get here in chapter 28. So he's on the run. He has an encounter with God as a result of that. Anything just in chapter 28 with as Jacob takes off and he's running from Esau. What jumps out to you guys?
I think verse 6. Isaac has literally told his sons not to marry the Hittite woman or a Canaanite woman in this chapter, and Esau hears this and does it anyway. And does it out of spite. And it just shows that like his anger wasn't just with Jacob, but it was with the father. And what I took from the verse is like not just my earthly father, but how many times when like I don't get my way with God and I know something is wrong, I'll do it anyway just to like prove myself right instead of like following his command. And how does that affect my lineage and affect my future?
Yeah,
it's good. Anything else?
yeah. Jacob's dream, like he had this beautiful dream of seeing like just these angels ascending and descending from heaven. And it says though it's like he had this encounter with God and he's like, man, this place, like the Lord is here. He's super excited about it and amazed. But I thought what was interesting is that as a result, like he makes a vow to God that was contingent upon God proving himself to him or doing something. Like it wasn't like this encounter through his dream led him to be like, okay, like God is real for real. Like I'm gonna serve the Lord. Like let's do this. It was like, oh, this is amazing. It's cool, but God, make sure I need to see you protect me and bring me back to my father's household. I need you to do something, and then will I serve you? Like then will you be my God? And I just thought that was just like, hold on, like you putting stipulations on God. Like you're the one coming with the commands. I thought that was weird.
Right. Yeah. If God does these things, if he'll be with me, if he provides, if I return safely, then the Lord will be my God. Yeah. Right. Like if he does all those things, that's real. That's like that's probably not the arrangement God desired, but very interesting.
Yeah, I think it just shows the difference in his relationship with God versus Isaac's and versus Abraham. Yeah. Because I even noted in verse 17, when he woke up from the dream, he was afraid. Like it says he was afraid, and then he's just like trying to make sense of this place. Yeah. But what I'm sure Abraham and Isaac had realized is like it wasn't about the place. Like this is God. Like God is is everywhere, and he's everywhere with me. And like, he kind of like made this significance, like this is the gate of heaven. Like, this is where God, you know, comes to the earth. And it really wasn't about that spot, but like about who God was and revealing himself to him. In which I think he was still learning. Yeah,
that's true. And for him to say, like, in that same breath, like, this is the house of God.
Yeah.
Well, is it? Because you said that you'll make it the house of God if, again, those things happen. So, yeah, like, he definitely was trying to figure out his faith and, like, you know, all of that in the midst of this.
It's a very interesting, like, I think one of the things you were pointing out to me, Victoria, is that, like, it seems that, like, the further they get from the promise, like from the initial promise that God makes Abraham, that like the more diluted it becomes, like the faith has become, right? Like when Abraham originally heard it, right? We get all these examples of great faith, whether it's, you know, putting his son on the altar or leaving his land, those kind of things. And then it seems it's like, okay, Isaac walks a lot of those same steps, right? He's getting ready to go to Egypt. He doesn't. He, you know, has an encounter with Abimelech. He, you know, also says his wife is a sister. Like all these kind of things that he happens. It's very similar.
Yeah.
Right. But we know, as we just talked about, there was some rebellion almost in the fulfillment of the promise of Jacob. Like he still was intentionally trying to avoid, like, you know, you talked about this yesterday, but even in the way that he seemed so skeptical of who he was talking to, right? You know, he was blind, but like he kept asking a lot of questions, like, are you sure this is, you know, Esau, right? Like, let me come close so I can smell you, right? Like he was really doing all he could to usurp like God's plan and bless Esau. And then now we get Jacob, who, like you said, it seems as if he has no idea kind of that God is with him all over the place. He's like, oh, and it's like the further they get, like the further proximity from like that initial promise, that initial blessing, it's like the faith has just been diluted over time. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I feel that honestly something very similar has happened like in culture and history, even the furthest we've gotten from like, you know, just to bring it forward, like the further we've gotten from Jesus and his resurrection, right? The further we've gotten from like that early church and the day of Pentecost and like the Holy Spirit fire that was there. It's like miracles don't seem as often, right? Or our faith seems like we don't believe some of these things are possible. And, you know, God we've just gotten further and further from like that initial experience and moment. And it feels that way. It feels diluted. It feels like our faith is diluted. Our church is diluted, like compared to what we read in that early moment. And so, I just had this takeaway that like, the further we get from that, man, their faith is dropping. And it's like, how do we get back to that? Like, how are we intentional about making sure that we stay connected to that initial promise and that initial faith of our forefathers?
Man, that's a whole word right there. That's real.
And my question is, in verse 18, how when he wakes up, that he takes the stone and sets it up as a pillar. Yeah. But then it says that he pours oil on top of it. Where does the oil come from?
Right. We've never seen this yet.
Yeah, and I'm just questioning it because we see that in previous chapters that he's a cook. And does a cook always keep oil on them? Like, I don't know. Yeah. I'm curious.
Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Excuse me. Yeah. Like, where does the oil come from?
So, Jacob continues his journey in chapter 29, right? So, again, he's left home at this point. And at this point, he lands in Haran. And this is an amazing story, another kind of story of God's providence and just his plan, right? As he encounters who will become his wives ultimately. But yeah, there's this story where he meets Rachel and he works for her. What jumped out to you guys about just this really kind of dramatic love story that we get between Jacob and Rachel here?
I was like, here go Laban on the scene with his schemes.
He's back.
He's back. I felt like this probably was something that was a little bit familiar for Laban because he did have that experience previously with Rebecca, right?
Yep.
And so, like, he probably was like, oh, yeah, I've been waiting for this moment for like, something like this to happen again, for me to have another encounter. And he really took it far this time, like, for him to just really use Jacob the way that he had. Like, you got him working for 14 years to get the original wife that he wanted because you wanted your oldest daughter to be married first. And yeah, he just really put Jacob through it. And this is where I start empathizing for Jacob, because part of me was like, well, maybe Jacob deserved this because he did some sketchy stuff too.
Yeah.
But there is empathy that I have, because I'm like, man, like, he really was like out here working like for Rachel, and to be deceived how he was, and you know, all the things that came with Laban. Like, it showed that greed. Like, Laban was really greedy, and he just constantly wanted more from him. So yeah,
and I think it kind of speaks to what we were talking about before. This was Abraham's fear. Like, you go back here, you can be wasting time, because the intention was for them never to go back. And I think for Laban, he runs out to meet him because he's expecting more gifts. And everything that we see that you speak about, it's all materialistic. Everything you give me, not even just like the flocks, but you also give my daughters more sons, and it's like, you know, all these things are materialistic, but he has no idea about the promises of God and the purpose.
Yeah, he definitely tried to like suck him in and keep him there,
right,
trapped there as long as possible. It's like you said, it's messed up. He low-key had it coming just for some of what he's done. But I think what stuck out to me is, I just love, like, you know, even just kind of contrasting it to, I think Victoria brought up like how Esau was so quick to give up his like birthright, you know, just for a meal, right? There was that instant gratification piece, like, I just need to eat right now, I'm willing to give up later. That, like, to juxtapose that with Jacob's willingness to like delay gratification, like, he had to work first. It would be like volunteer 7 years, like that was his idea the first time, right? Like, I will work 7 years for Rachel, and to do that, and then to say I'll double down and do it again just to get, because I want Rachel. And I don't know if, I mean, I was just really challenged by like how willing he was to say, there's something I want and I'm willing to put in the work and the time, right, to get it. Because it's not like I can just earn it faster, right? It's not like money. Like, I can just go earn, if I can get it, you know, hit the lotto or put it in the right mutual fund and it does well, like, I can get this done fast. It's like, time was necessary. It was part of that equation. But he was willing to do that. And then, like, you know, I love that verse 20 says that for him, it was like a few days, like, because he wanted it so badly. He loved her so much that it was like, the time went by like this, because he really wanted what was at the end. And so, like I said, just comparing that to Esau's unwillingness to kind of see beyond today in this moment, that Jacob had that. He had that willingness to pursue and to push and to endure whatever it took to achieve what he was trying to get.
I think it's so interesting that even just back at verse 11, it says, then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. I think even just from there, I was like, wait, we kiss him?
Right.
No, I know it's culturally, right? And so Laban came and kissed Jacob as well. But it just showed that, like, there's this like overwhelming emotion that like he had from the beginning. And I think it's also interesting that she was the first person that he had met, just kind of like Rebecca was the first person that the servant met, like that this initial encounter here was like the one. And I wonder what that emotion was when I saw that. But then to see that, like, it wasn't something that fleeted for him, that like he was still very much like loved Rachel, and that he worked, like he said, tirelessly for her. Like, it was just interesting.
Yeah, and like one last thing on that too, because I think growing up, I used to always read this or have always understood it as like he had to wait the full 14 years to get Rachel. Like it was 7 years and then another 7 years. But like the way I read the text, he got Rachel after 7 years. Like the initial 7 years, he gets Rachel at the conclusion of that feast. And then he works the other 7 years that he had committed to. And so to me, there's also just like this speaking to of just even following through, right? Like that you already have what you've been promised, but you just keep your word and like stick through what it is that you said you would do. And so there was an element of respect. I think I came out of it reading it this time. Yeah. Whereas before, I think I'd always understood it as like he worked 7 years, then 7 years, and he finally got Rachel. For whatever reason, this time I actually noticed what it said. And it was just like, oh, no, he gets Rachel at the end of conclusion of this feast. And then he works the 7 years that he has to pay off for that. And I just love that commitment to, I said I would do it, right? This is what I said I would do, and I'm going to follow through on that. And what I gave you is my word.
Yeah. I also feel like Laban set up this whole division to happen. Like, you know, Leah wasn't the first person that, you know, Jacob wasn't even stunting her. And for him to do that, it was at the expense of Leah experiencing not being loved. Like, just experiencing like, I'm not his favorite. And clearly, like, my sister is what he really wants. So I thought that was heartbreaking because it was like, it was a result of his the consequences of his actions that she had to endure the life that she did.
Yeah. I think like that kind of goes back to the story with Rebecca and like why it was so significant for the Lord to tell her that the older should serve the younger, because like she comes from Laban's house. And I think Laban was so submitted to culture that he had to do whatever to make sure that Leah went first, because Leah was the older. So culturally, he wanted to abide by those laws. But I think when you're submitted to culture, you can essentially waste time and keep people, waste time for other people as well.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, even as we've talked about with like Hagar and Ishmael, right? Like we have another kind of victim of circumstance. Like it's not Leah's fault. Yeah. Right? Like Leah didn't desire to marry, Jacob. I mean, at least we don't know that. It's not written here, but like there's this, she's a victim of that circumstance. And again, we see God hear her. Right? Like in the way that God heard Hagar and heard the cries of Ishmael. Like we see that as soon as we get to verse 31, like God sees Leah and like blesses Leah and opens her womb and gives her something that even her sister can't have at that point. And he does that. That again, like I know this happened to you and not because of you. Yeah. But like I see you. Yeah. And I love that just tender care from God of, again, we've all been there where something happens and it's like it's out of our control. It's not fair. It doesn't feel fair. But to just see that God still is with her and sees her, I just love that. That theme that we've been reading.
And it wasn't even that it says that she was just loved less. It says she was hated in my version of ESV. It's like, and Leah was hated, and so God opened her womb. So like to one of your points before in the previous days, like the one God is still sovereign in the opening and the closing of these wombs. Yeah. And it was like I see you, like just kind of like a Hagar situation. Like I see you, like it's like I see you. And it's interesting though, because like Leah, she kept so much weight in these children though, that like as she kept naming these children, she's like, now he'll love me, like now he'll attach himself to me, like now I'll win him over because I'm giving him these sons. But to see though that he still loved Rachel, even though she was barren, like it was heartbreaking. And it said this division that Laban's created between these sisters, like I don't want to assume that they had these feuds like this before, this whole situation. But now it's like this great tension between these sisters. Yeah. And now like Leah's hated and she feels neglected, and she is neglected, but she's trying to find her validation and her self-worth now in these sons.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me though, because I'm like, well, if you hate her so much, why do you keep sleeping with her?
Yeah.
Just leave her alone.
Yeah.
But
yeah. It's interesting to see the women in the Bible. They hold so much weight with children. Like they just, it's like they put their worth and their value in having children, and they're willing to go the great lengths to like make it happen. And so you see this cycle again with Rachel, where she's not conceiving, so she done got her slave to be able to have a child for her, where we saw that before in scripture. And so again, just being willing to go the lengths of like, well, if I can't do it, I'm trying to put matters in my own hands to create this lineage and to please my husband as well through that.
Yeah, can I tell you guys, my favorite thing for this entire week is in these verses here, and I'm just gonna add to it even what you just mentioned with Rachel, because I think she actually pulls this thread even further. But like, to your point with the names, like, I just love how Leah's naming these children, and every one of them is about earning the husband's love, right? Yeah. Lord has seen my affliction, surely my husband will love me now, right? Heard me again and I'm loved, give me another son. He, at last my husband will become attached to me because I've born 3 sons, named them Levi. Like, these first 3 sons, it's all about her husband.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we get to the 4th son, and it says, this time I will praise the Lord. She named him Judah, and then Leah stopped having children. And when I say I almost shouted when I read this, I almost shouted when I read this, because I was like, finally. I feel like God was like, finally.
You get it. Yeah.
Me, it's about me.
It's about yes,
like, your attention should be here. Like, you've been seeking this love from your husband. All of everything. Every time I bless you, I heard you. I'm the one that heard you. I heard your cry. I blessed you, and you still directed it back to him. You're focused on him. I gave it to you. And now you finally get it. And she's like, you don't need more children. Now we're good. We've settled it, because now you get the picture. It's about me. And to your point, what's so crazy is she's wanting what Rachel has.
Right.
Which is the love from her husband. And Rachel wants what Leah has, which is the son. They both missing the picture.
Yeah.
Like, they're both missing the point. And God's like, it's about me.
Right.
Like, it's been about me from the front. And like, when I say like, I want to throw my Bible. I just want to shout. Like, I was like, this is so applicable, because we are so focused on what God can give us, and what we're lacking or we're missing, that we forget that the answer to all of that is just God. He is that answer. He is what we are missing. He is that that hole, that void, whatever it is in our life. Like, the answer to fill that is just him. Just praise him. Like, worship him, his presence. Like this, she said, this time I'll praise the Lord. He's like, all right, good. We're good now. We got it. I'm good. And I don't know, man, like that, the entire week, there's not anything that just blessed me like that verse did this week. Because that, I was just like, man, I could take that to the bank. Like, right now, I'm good. But yeah, so that was I was excited about that. All week long, we've been reading this. I was like, yo, I can't wait till we get to talk about, excuse me, this verse specifically.
That's really good.
So we get the rest of Jacob's sons. So it kind of ends into chapter 29. We get Leah's. Then, as you said, Rachel offers up her servant. And then I feel like Leah misses the point again, right? She starts getting a little jealous here, right? So she starts offering up her servants, and she also has another. And so they kind of go back and forth here for the rest of the lineage here of Jacob and the rest of his sons, and some daughters in the midst of this. Anything else that jumped out to you guys as we kind of roll into chapter 30 with the rest of Jacob's sons?
Yeah, I think even just that first verse, that's when Rachel was just like, give me children or I shall die. And then like Jacob is like anger towards her, and asks, am I in the place of God? And so first of all, I think it's interesting because you said Leah wants this relationship that Rachel and Jacob have, but they're feuding. Like, they're at odds. Like, it's not even peaches and roses over there. Like, they're at odds. And I think it was really interesting that, you know, Isaac and Rebecca, we both saw that they prayed. Like, they prayed to the Lord about this barrenness, and they prayed to the Lord about when she was pregnant. And here, I just don't see here that they have put in the text that, like, this was a posture of prayer in their heart for her barrenness.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, once again, it's like, let me just take matters in my own hands and make it happen. And she assumes that, like, this is going to fulfill her needs or fulfill her desires and give her what she wants, but it falls short because she's still miserable. Like, she's still looking for more, and it's just still lacking.
Yeah. I think it's verse 15 and 16 just always makes me laugh. Just the way, you know, Rachel sold her husband off for some mandrakes. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, you get to sleep with him tonight in exchange for some mandrakes. Like, just that whole, like you said, this whole relationship has become transactional between Rachel, Leah, and Jacob. And it's just, it's unfortunate, right? Because it started with really like a love story. And now it just feels like, man, it's just competition. It's just an arms war of like who could have the most sons and, you know, who's loved more. And even to the point that it's literally an actual transaction that takes place that gets Leah pregnant one more time. Like, it's just, it's very interesting how this is all played out.
Yeah. And to see Leah's mindset again, she done lost the whole point. Like, the fact that she thought that God had blessed her because of giving her servant to Jacob. I was like, yeah, Leah, that most likely was not it.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting to note that Leah gives Jacob the most kids. And Leah was the same one that Jacob hated. And when I think about that in like my life, if I submit to the things that I hate doing the most, those are probably the things that I'm going to be the most fruitful in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I remember like one pastor, he was preaching about this and he was saying like, you know, we think about this in terms of like just a girl and another girl, but it's like, what if Leah represents like prayer and discipline? Like, if I submit to that, even though I don't want to do it, I can find fruit in it.
Oh, yeah.
And furthermore, it's like, we know that Jesus comes from the line of Judah.
Exactly.
So I won't just find fruit in it, but I'll also find Jesus in it.
Yeah. No, that's...
That was the part that struck me. I was just like, Rachel didn't even have the lineage of Jesus come through her. Like, it was too late. I was like, wow, the blessing that the Lord gave her.
Yeah.
No, that's so real. And I love that because even if you just pull that illustration more, I mean, Rachel is the desire of his heart, right? And like just thinking about, again, those things that we desire, how often those mislead us. Like, those will take us places and we chase that. But as you said, just that discipline, those daily disciplines, those things that we don't really want to do ultimately yield the greatest return often. Yeah. And that's a good one, Doc. I'm asleep on that one. That's good. Okay. So we get the rest of the lineage. Eventually Rachel does have a son kind of here in the middle of this chapter. And this is where Joseph is born. But right after that, after Rachel gives birth to Joseph, Jacob is trying to get out of this land. And so he kind of comes up with a plan to get some more flock and earn some wealth. And then ultimately, this is all a setup for him to ultimately be able to leave and separate from Laban. But any other thoughts here in the end of chapter 30 here?
I think it's interesting that in my version, verse 27, Laban says, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you.
Oh, wow.
And I just think it's just like, wow, like how far he is from God, like in terms of like a relationship, like he's really not walking in a relationship with the Lord because that, he says, not his custom of where he's living and how he's was brought up and raised was those of the pagan cultures, and like they practice different things, right? And they practice, seeking mediums or whatever it might be, and to get their answers. And so it wasn't like I sought the Lord or I've been watching. Like it's like, no, I sought some divination, and I figured out like all this is happening because the Lord is with you. And so I think it was very interesting.
Yeah, which we still see that play out right later with the gods and some other stuff that she hides with the idols, I should say. But and I think it brings up a point that really started in Genesis 3, but we see play out often even with Jesus later, that I think it's interesting that again he sought divination but still could identify God in that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that like the enemy knows the truth as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Like and so that we not lose sight of, hey, trust the enemy recognizes who God is. And so it's not as if just because he sought divination, he was going to be confused and lost. Like they can identify, the enemy can identify God and truth. And so although he sought it by different means, like it still directed him back to God. And that's simply because the enemy knows too. He absolutely knows who God is. Yeah. Anything else that sticks out to you guys just kind of here into chapter 30 before we kind of transition into Jacob actually separating from Laban?
I think like it's just interesting to see this pattern of manipulation from birth for Jacob. And it's like the manipulation is sort of the thing that got him into this mess. And then now this same manipulation is what's about to get him out of it. Yeah. And I was always conflicted about like Jacob's behavior, because I'm like, this can't be right, God, if you're not living in truth and you're manipulating people. That has to be classified as sin, right? Yeah. But it's like God never condemns Jacob for this behavior. Like even with the flock, like he is actually like blessed through it. And I wonder if it's just like God saying that I know who you are, because ultimately we see there's changes in Jacob, but it's like I'm gonna take your flaws and your iniquity and use that for my purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. It's good. Well, yeah, he does manipulate, and it earns his way out essentially, away from Laban. Now, Laban, as we've talked about earlier, is not just willingly letting Jacob leave. He is very much concerned with how this impacts him, for Jacob to leave, because at this point, since Jacob's been there, he's been favored, right? He's had a lot of things work well for him. But here in chapter 31, Jacob gets the opportunity to leave finally, and after some back and forth there. Anything that just jumped out to you guys with Jacob's separation from Laban?
You guys alluded to it earlier, just like Rachel taking the household gods. I'm like, nah, why she had to go and take that? And I think it just was like a part of her upbringing that she saw, like her father like worshiping these things or doing whatever, and obviously it was something more intuitive for like even Laban to say for himself, like, I done saw through divination these things happen. So I just wonder why, like, or what she planned on doing as a result of taking those gods along with her.
Yeah.
And back to Eric's point in chapter 30, chapter 29, when we talk about Leah getting the point with Judah and giving it back to the Lord. And I wonder if part of the reason Rachel had less children and remained barren is because in her heart, it was really for those household gods still. Like it was never truly like directed towards Yahweh. There was still a small part of her throughout her life that was still dedicated to her old religions.
And I think it's painful to even just see, like, in verse 32, when Jacob declares, anyone with whom you find your God shall not live. And I just feel like he just declares her early death. Like, just not long after that, like, Rachel, she dies from childbirth.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm just like, wow, like, the words that we speak, we talked about the blessings and the curses and these things that we are saying. Like, I wonder if that is why, indeed, she lost her life earlier than all the others, just because this came out of his mouth. Like, and she was the one who had his gods.
Yeah. Of course, he didn't know that she took it, but like he was like, okay, this is worth someone dying for. But yeah, they even like how valuable those were for Laban. Like, he's coming back looking for him.
Right.
Like, he's like, I done counted all these up. I know what's missing and what I had. Like, he's searching for him. Like, he really felt like that's where he had his faith in. Like, he really felt like these are the things that are getting me what I've gotten thus far.
And I think it speaks to the idea that, like, so many people viewed Yahweh as like for what he could offer.
Yeah, a genie.
Right? Like, because Laban recognized Yahweh's blessing and favor on Jacob. Right? Abimelech, same, on an Isaac or an Abraham. Like, people recognized who God was, who Yahweh was in the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet, they were still unwilling to let go of the other idols and gods that they had.
Yeah.
Because all they really wanted from God was a favor that he granted others. Like, they didn't really want God. Right?
Yeah.
Like, they just wanted the favor that he granted others. Oh, the way you're blessing them and their flock is growing and this is happening. I want that. I don't want to serve you. I don't want to live for you. I just want what you offer.
Yeah.
And it's like, you just see that play out in this, that like you said, Laban is motivated to go get these back, when it's like, you really would have thought that all that time he spent with Jacob for a decade and a half and such, that at some point he would have come away with, you know what, Yahweh is God.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not blessed like this. These idols haven't done this for me. Yahweh is God. He is whom I should serve. And yet he still came away with, like, his motivation for all of it was, what can God do for me?
Yeah.
And that's just, I don't know, man, like that's
yeah. You see that in today's time too, like, people giving their life to Christ, if you will, for the salvation of, like, eternity with God, but then choosing to not follow him, like, have a relationship with him, like, actually be devoted to him. Because it's like, no, I was just in it for this, but I want to actually be my own God and do what I want to do.
Absolutely.
And it really is sad.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. But I think, even to your point, and I know
Collin perked up.
I'll let Collin jump in. I think to your point, I will say it's somewhat comforting to know that, like, again, this is not just my generation issue, but, like, it's the plight of humanity, right? It's the plight of mankind. This is something we've always struggled. And to know that there's still hope, right? Because God ultimately was able to send Jesus and do some other things that redeemed us. But, like, to just know that there's hope in that. But Collin, I'm gonna let you jump in, man.
I just had a wild thought, and we can cut this out if need be. But in verse 32, it says, Laban's coming back looking for those household gods, and it says, "But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live." And we know that Rachel has them, and the way that she hides them is through her period and sitting on them. And what I just thought is, like, the blood saved Rachel. And I feel like it's like a type scene of, like, Jesus's blood.
Yeah.
And how it saves us. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's
like
both sides of that, though, right? Because, like, to your point, like, there is that imagery or that illustration, right? In that But even to Victoria's point, I mean, ultimately it feels like a curse, like specifically of, like, even if you think about how she died, right? If she's sitting on these idols, right?
Yeah.
It is ultimately her womb that kills her.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Right?
That's what I was thinking.
Ooh.
Like, it's ultimately her womb that kills her.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's giving birth to Benjamin, as we get to, right? Like, it's literally like these idols have cursed her specifically in that way and have declared that death. Like, yeah, man, like, that's just
Wow.
That's good.
Now that's like, I didn't even put that together.
Yeah.
Like, the location and where.
specifically where the idols are located at this point.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Can we pause real quick?
You said I gotta go take a breather, run some laps.
Yeah, that's exactly what my thought though was. He said she's using it to hide these gods that she values so much, and the Lord's like, no, I'm God.
Yeah.
Like I'm the real God, and these will be to your death. Then
Wow.
Yeah, it's heavy. No pun intended there. But let's continue. We gotta wrap up here, chapter 31, and then go to our conversation. But after this, Jacob makes a covenant with Laban, and yeah, I mean, it's ultimately a way to hopefully create peace. I'm assuming it's kind of his goal here. Anything that just jumped out to you guys with Jacob's covenant with Laban?
yeah, I think it's really interesting because he said Laban acknowledges this God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, right? And isn't that his father? Or Abraham's father? Was that his Laban's uncle? I'm trying to figure out, like, I think this is Abraham's father was Nahor, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this Laban's uncle. It's like he acknowledges, it's like, this is y'all God, but like he said, there's still not this acceptance because in his mind, he said Yahweh's not the only God. Like, y'all have y'all gods, I got my gods, and you know, I'll use them as need be.
Right.
And he said even God came to Laban in a dream in verse 24 and made himself known to Laban and gave him instructions, but yet still Laban has not accepted him as this God. But yet there's this covenant and this witness that he's having between him and acknowledging this God of Abraham and Nahor. Right.
Yeah.
And not for himself. I think this is really interesting that, like, there's so many opportunities for Laban to choose Yahweh for himself, but he still has not done that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, in general, like this, it's another example, as Victoria's alluded to before, where it doesn't seem like Jacob's like a consulting God kind of before this covenant. And as we come to know, right, I mean, covenants are extremely serious and extremely binding. And so to make a decision like that with Laban, particularly after all that had kind of took place, seemed a little unwise. But and there doesn't seem to be a consultation there. But it ultimately seems the goal for Jacob is, man, just peace. Like, I'm just tired of dealing with you. Like, can we just be over this? And Laban's just kind of like, look, I want to make sure I'm still on your good side. Like, by the time all this has happened, because I've done you dirty and I just don't want you coming back for me later. Yeah. But anything else from their covenant that stuck out to you guys?
I think it's also really interesting that Laban was taking possession over Jacob's stuff. Like, Laban was like, the daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks. And once again, just to what you guys were speaking of earlier, it's like he is really about this stuff. Like, I don't think he really cared about them, but to him, it was more so about like the acquisition of stuff and people and things, and so that was really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. And I think, like, verse 54. It talks about them after they make the covenant, they making sacrifices and then having a meal. And I'd assume that the sacrifices and the meal that they're having is part of the flock that came from, Laban and Jacob's history. Yeah. And it's like, I think this kind of is like the first time that we see like a meal like this happening, and it shows you like the importance of meals. That it helps you to not only build relations, but it also leads to like reconciliation, because you're able to sit down with, in this sense, like an enemy, and remember that it's not necessarily about us, but there's something bigger, and it's something that we built, and God has blessed us in this moment. And the fact that we're able to sit down and eat, it just shows you how good God has been.
Yeah. It's good. Anything else in 31? Our hearts and minds. We clear.
Clear.
Well, again, thank you guys for joining us for day 11. We'll see you guys tomorrow as we wrap up this week.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible.